Hi, I'm Michelle. Welcome to my quilting beehive. Today I'm going to show you how to make a woven star quilt block. It looks complicated, but it's not too bad. It's very simple. And we are using it in the 2023 Colchester Mill Marvelous Mystery quilt. If you haven't heard about the mystery quilt, there'll be a link below. You can look on my website to get details. It's not too late to join the mystery. We are on part 5 of the 12-part mystery quilt, and you can find out more about it if you click on the link. Before I start showing you about the block, I just want to take a minute to be a proud mom. My son Nathaniel is a graphic design major at VCU, and I asked him to design a My Quilting Beehive design for a t-shirt for me. And this is what he came up with using my logo and different parts. And it says, "Quilting keeps me busy as a bee," because that is what I am. We've designed this shirt. We also have an option without words, and I have them available in my Etsy shop, so you can help my young college student become a professional designer with your purchase of a shirt. There'll be links below to my Etsy shop if you want to find out more about those. But now back to our block. The Woven Star Quilt block is arranged 4 by 4 units. It has some half square triangles and some squares, and in the middle is a little block that has 2 small triangles with a large triangle. If you look here, these are all the pieces you're going to need. You're going to make your half square triangles, cut out your squares, and then for the middle part, we have some half square triangles made up that are a little larger, and we are going to add another triangle to them to make them the pieces we need here. I'm going to set my block aside, and I am going to pull out my pieces, and I'm going to make sure I arrange them in the same order that they are in the pattern. The hard part on this block is to make sure you keep your pieces in the right order. So I'm making sure to line them up to match the picture in the pattern. And you have your pattern, so look at that and line them up accordingly. And you know what? I have them facing this way, but I'm going to actually turn them around so they're facing the same way you would have them in your pattern. Because you're looking, I don't want a mirrored image on you, so I'm going to flip them around so they're facing you the way they would be in the pattern. Okay. What you're going to do with each of these blocks is you're going to cut them on a diagonal so we can add another triangle to them. When you cut them on the diagonal, I'm lining up my ruler point to point here, but can you zoom right in on that? We're also going to line up a straight line on the ruler on that diagonal so we make sure it is going to be evenly cut in half right there. So I'm going to cut that right in half, and I end up with 2 pieces. And then I have them in the same direction as the pattern. Make sure you watch your pattern so you don't cut them in half the wrong direction. And I'm going to line up my ruler and cut that in half. I'm going to line up my ruler point to point with a straight line across here. Make sure it's square and even. And I'm going to cut all 4 pieces like that. Once you have them all cut in half, you're going to line them up the way they are in the pattern. If you take each piece, you're going to make 2 sets, a set A and a set B. And we're going to flip them around and try to make them match the exact layout of the photograph in the illustration in your pattern. Use care to make sure you don't mix them up. Once they look exactly the same as they are in your pattern, you are going to have the top row is set A, the bottom row is set B. Set B we are not going to use in this quilt. We're taking those ones away. We're only using set A. If we tried to use set B, they'd be reversed and they wouldn't work for our pattern. So once you have them in order, then you're going to use your triangle pieces that you have cut and refer to the illustration to make sure you match them. Color matching is what makes the woven star work. So we need to make sure we have the right colors with the right ones. So the first one is going to be that, which is fabric 6 in the Marvelous Mystery. And then we're going to have this one, which is fabric 5 in the Marvelous Mystery. And then fabric 4 of the Marvelous Mystery and fabric 3 of the Marvelous Mystery. Double check your diagrams in your pattern. Make sure you have them looking the way they do in the pattern. Fabric placement matters. They are numbered in the pattern, so you can make sure your fabric colors match up in the right place. Once you have them all matched up, you are going to put them right sides together, and you'll bring them over to your sewing machine to sew. Once you get to your sewing machine, your pieces are separated together in groups. You're not going to mix them up. They're all exactly how you want them to be. You are going to get ready to sew. When you line these up, make sure your point on your big triangle is lined up with the center line between the two little triangles, so it's squared, and the bottom edge lines up even with the bottom edge of the fabric. The two small triangles, we didn't trim them up, so they might be a little bit off, and that's okay because we are going to square these up after. When I sew, I like to have seam allowance side on top so my feed dogs don't get caught on it. So I'm going to flip it over when I sew it. I'm going to make sure it's lined up, and I'm going to bring it over, and we can chain piece these. Use an accurate quarter inch seam and stitch them right through. And then make sure your next one's lined up, centered the point on the center. Make sure the bottom edge is even. And chain piecing just means you keep that one in and just keep going so you're not wasting thread. And if you're making all 4 blocks at once, you can chain piece all of them at one time. I'm making 1 block here, so I'm just doing these 4 for you. And line it up, take your time. I've got my quarter inch foot on there, so I know I've got a quarter inch seam, and I've tested it. If you have trouble with a quarter inch seam, you can look back. I have a video on getting your quarter inch seam accurate. And that's an important skill that you need to practice. Practice makes perfect. Once you've chain pieced them all, you can snip them apart. Once you have them all pressed, you need to trim them to exactly 2.5 inches. And I'm using my Creative Grid square, 4.5 inch square. You can use any square ruler that has a diagonal line on it, your 6.5 or any size that you have. When you line up your ruler, you're first going to line up that line on the diagonal. That's important. But then you also want to look where this diagonal line is. You want that point to be at exactly 2.5 inches when you trim, because if I trim it and I'm way down here, it's not going to be centered in the corner of your little square. So you want to make sure you have 2.5 inches right at that point in your center line on the diagonal. And so then you're going to trim across the top and across the side. Take those pieces out of your way. Rotate your block around. Line it up. And because you had that mark exactly at 2.5 the first time, it will line up again here. Diagonal line again. And we will trim away the other 2 sides. Just like that. You're going to repeat that with each block. I'll do one more to show you, and then we will get ready to put our block together. So I'm laying my diagonal line on there, and then I'm going to shift my ruler until my 2.5 inch point is right where the 2 little triangles cross at the corner. Cut off the top, cut off the side, rotate it around, line it up. Now it's 2.5 inches, 2.5 inches. My diagonal line is centered on the diagonal, and I'm going to trim off the other 2 sides. You'll have different amounts depending on how you pieced them, and that's okay. Some of them will be skinnier pieces, some will be wider pieces. Just repeat until you have all of them trimmed up, and then we'll get ready to lay out the block. Now that we have our 4 center units made and we have our half square triangles and squares, it's time to put together our little puzzle. We want to make our block look exactly like this one. So we know the 4 corners. That we'll start with those because those are simple. 4 corners are going to be laid out like this. Okay. And then we will take our half square triangle units that are going to go as the points of our star. So we're going to go through, and it's going to make star points. So the pink ones are opposite each other, like that. They line up. They make a line through the block, so we want them to line up here. Then we'll do our purple ones like this. And that's going to go down here. And again, they're going to be near each other in a line. Then our blue ones. And these star points, you'll know you have them right because they point to each other when you put them together. So they make a star. And like that. I'm just going to move them closer together. Now we need our 4 centerpieces. These are the ones that are going to be a little bit trickier, but it's not so bad if you think about it because you're going to be matching the colors. So this one has the pink corner. It's going to line up with a pink one. This one has the big blue triangle, so we're going to put it here. Just play around. If it's going to make sense, if you have it the right way, it's going to line up. And this one has the green triangle, which is going to touch this green triangle. Large triangles. And then our last piece, you know, if you have it the wrong way, it's going to turn, and we don't want turns in there. We want to make sure they line up. So if you put it out, they will all line up. We got the blue and the purple here, and we got the pink and the green going this way. So you'll know your blocks lined up. If by some reason you have them mixed up, as long as they're over under and you make your blocks the same, it's not going to matter if you turn it and have them go in a different direction. But there's only one way that the 4 middle ones will go. So you're going to have it all laid out. We're going to bring this over to the sewing machine and talk about how it goes together. Once you're by your sewing machine, have your block laid out and arranged so it's all in the right direction. Double check to make sure your lines are over, under, and weaving, and your colors are going the way you want them to. The hardest part here is to make sure you don't turn them around and mix them up when you're putting your block through the machine. You want to make sure to keep it in order. Do be sure that you follow the pressing directions throughout the pattern to make sure that your seams will nest and give you the least bulk. I tried to make sure all the instructions were designed for the least amount of bulk. I like to sew left to right, so I'm going to take my first 2 pieces and bring them over here. I'm going to flip this one over, right sides together. Now when I sew, I don't always like to start with that big seam right at the beginning. I want to make sure this is the side I'm sewing, so I'm just going to flip it over and start with the side that does not have the bulky seam to feed through the machine. So I'm going to sew this one right down with a 1/4 inch seam, and I'm going to leave that in there. I'm going to change these. I'm going to take the next 2 pieces in row 2. We're going to sew row 1, row 2, row 3, row 4. So I'm taking row 2, the 2 pieces that go together, and I'm going to flip this over. Now this one has a spot where we want our seams to line up. We want those points to line up. So when I flip this one over, I'm going to look at these seams and make sure we have that one pressed open, this one going to one side. So I'm going to make sure they line up, and I'm going to just stick 1 pin in there to make sure they don't shift while I'm sewing. The top, we're not matching anything at the top. So now I can sew through. And make sure you sew close to the pin, but don't hit the pin. Remove it just before you get to it. And then that one's done. The next one, this one's not lining up with anything, so we don't have to match any points on this one. We're going to bring it right in. And the last one, again, there's no points to line up, so we can just bring it over. And I've gotten the first 2 of each row sewn through. Now I like to keep one in there, and I just cut away the 3 blocks before that. And I'm going to put them right back in place so I know that my block is still in order. We know the ones with the 2 small triangles and 1 big triangle go in the center, so we know it won't get twisted around. Check to make sure your colors are still lined up, and they are. So now my next 2, I'm going to start with row 1 again, and I'm going to match those 2 up. Those seams were pressed opposite, so they will nest. Put them together. You can stick a pin in them, or it's a small block, I can just hold it feed it through my machine, make sure those seams have nested, and then I can take that bottom row and bring it back over here to make sure it's in the right place. So now I'm going to keep going. I'm going to add these two. We have two seams that match here. They are going to nest as well. That's why it was important to make sure you follow the pressing direction so these pieces will lay flat and fit together nicely. And these ones as well, we have two seams. We want them to nest, the big triangles. So nest them together. And as I go, I can put each one back in place so that the block stays in order. Top row, middle row. These bottom ones are going to nest as well. Feel them, make sure they feel flat. They're up against each other really tight so that they will have a good point when we are ready to sew them together. Feed them through. And we have them all in order. They're still lining up. So now my top row needs the last piece. All right. We don't have any points to match on this one. There's no nesting, nothing lines up. They just need to be sewn together. But on this one, this is where these points are going to line up with this one. So these ones we do have to watch. So take your time here. Make sure that corner lines up. And in mine it's blue fabric is lining up nicely. You can pin it if you'd like. I'm just going to hold it in place and get it under there without shifting it. And then my last square. Then we can snip these apart and bring them to our ironing board. We're going to press one out and the other two, one to the right and the other two to the left. Don't wiggle your iron much, just let that heat flatten it out good and flat. In your second row, you're pressing your seams outside on the two ends, but the middle one, because of all the bulk in there, we're going to press that middle one open. I don't like to press seams open if I don't have to, but that middle one would be one that I recommend pressing open, just to make it less bulky in the center. When you're pressing your seam open, that's the one time I do start from the back. You have to open it up. Use your fingers to get it started. Open it up and then put your iron on it and let it sit. Whenever I press a seam open, I always go back to the front to make sure there's not a little pucker or tuck or fold that isn't supposed to be there, and I give it a hit from the front after I hit it in the back. So that way I know it is open, and it goes right there. This one also, the middle seam is going to be open. And then the outer seams are going to be opposite this one. The previous row, they were going away from the center. This row, they're going to have to go towards the center. So we can press those towards the center. Make sure you don't get any tucks or folds in there. And you rotate it around several times, so make sure when you have it all pressed, you put it back in the right direction. And it'll be really obvious that pink definitely doesn't belong over here, so I have to flip it over. That's not right. This one's wrong too. Look at that. See that? Sometimes you get them all twisted around and it doesn't work. Make sure you think about it. Make sure the greens and the blues all make those lines. And I did. Little thing like that just changed the whole block. And the pink lined up and the blue lined up, but then it didn't work with the next one. So you have to make sure, take your time, think about it. A little bit of a puzzle here to get them all in the right position. And then you will press your last one and we will get ready to sew our entire row together. Be sure to watch the direction on the pattern for which way your seams need to go. When you carry it back to your sewing machine, make sure all the pieces are still in the right order. Make sure we didn't flip any around, because that definitely is like, wait, what did I do? Is it wrong? You definitely have to take your time to make sure they're lined up. I'm going to take the top row and flip it over on top of this one. And I'm going to actually sew it from the other side. So I'll show you, that's actually flipping the bottom. We're going to flip the bottom so I can watch these 2 points that we need to match on here. So that way I'm going to sew this edge. Whenever you can see the point, it makes it easier to line up and match. We have done several lessons that involved pinning to match your points perfectly, so I'm definitely going to do that on this one. I'm going to take my pin, put it right through that point that I want to keep. There's no point on the other side, but we are going to line it up, put my pin right in the seam allowance so they're lined up. We weren't able to nest every set of seams in this block because you just can't go both directions. So this seam is one of the ones that isn't able to nest. If you really want to press one of them open, you can, if it makes it a little flatter for you. And then the middle seam, when we press the seam open, you can see my point is where that pink triangle comes down on mine. So that is my point that I want to match. And on the other side, I have my background fabric. And I can stick my pin right in there. And this would be one we can use the 3 pins, add 2 pins, 1 on each side to make them secure. And over here, we're going to just line up the point. And that bottom one doesn't have a point. We're just matching 1 point and matching the seam allowance line. Right. There. All right, once you have it all pinned, bring it to your machine and use your accurate 1/4 inch. As soon as you get close to the pin, remove it, leave it in as long as you can, but don't hit it. You don't want to damage your machine or break a needle and have a piece go flying towards you. Leave it in. I'm leaving it in until it's almost to the needle, as long as I can. And I watch right inside between my foot, where the space is between the foot. And sew all the way across. Then we're going to repeat the same thing with this piece. And you'll see we have points to match here and here. These are on top, so I'm going to flip it this way. We weren't able to press our seams to see that point, so we're going to use our pins to show where that point is. That point is right here, so my pin goes right through there and right into this seam. These ones do nest, which makes it nice. We can put that pin right in there. When we sew, we're going to want to sew right where that pin is, because that was where my point was. So that will help me see where my point should be and where my sew line needs to be to make it a perfect point. And pin to match. This one has points on both sides. When they have points on both sides is when I use my 3 pins. I'm going to put a pin on either side of that center one that goes right through the 2 points. And leave that center one in there, and that shows me where I need to sew right into that spot right there. And we have one more point here. I'm putting my pin 1/4 inch right into the tip of that triangle, and then into the seam allowance that matches up with it. Pull it through. And give it a sew. Take your time, make sure you pull those pins out before you hit them. You don't want to damage your machine. I don't know how many times I can say that. Don't damage your machine. That's like so important. Take your Bring those to your ironing board, press them according to the directions, and then we'll get ready to sew the last 2 halves together. We are going to be matching points at all 3 of the intersections here. So I'm going to flip this over, right sides together, and we are going to do the pin, 2-pin technique, 3-pin technique, where you pin right into where the point is to line up those 2 points. These seams will nest. So you can put them close together, have them nest, and have the pin pull those 2 points together, and then pin your seam allowances down so they are ready to go. It's worth taking a little bit of extra time to pin carefully, otherwise you will be spending more time with the ripping machine there. Nobody likes to rip. So pull the pin to pull those 2 points close together, and put a pin in each seam allowance to hold it secure. And leave that 3rd pin in, and I just flip it around so I can see where that point is. And last one, it takes time, patience, but you'll feel so proud when they all match up perfectly. So that pin is holding those 2 points close together, and you throw in the 2 pins, one on either side. To make sure it doesn't shift when you're sewing and the feed dogs are pulling on it. So there we go, it's all pinned and ready to sew with my 1/4 inch seam allowance. I don't want to hit my pin, so I stop, pull out my pin, take a couple stitches. I'm right near the center pin now, and then the last pin. Then you can go a little faster until you get to the next point. That first pin helps keep the seam allowances from getting caught on the feed dogs. So pull right through. And make sure they stay lined up. And then we open it up, check our work, and see how our points are. If there are any that you need to fix, you can go back and check them. This one I could probably go in just a tiny bit more if I want to, but I think I'm happy with it. So there we go. That is our folded star block. If you're not making the Marvelous Mystery quilt and would like to make this block, you can check in my Etsy store. I will have a pattern available for you to purchase on how to make the folded star, the woven star block. Thank you.